The distress signal from Colony Varan had been repeating for 11 months. Same words, same frequency, same desperate loop: food reserves at 4%, medical supplies exhausted, children dying. 11 months and the Galactic Council had done nothing. They called it a regional dispute. They called it a matter requiring diplomatic patience. The Drethkai Dominion called it a blockade. They had 47 warships sitting at the mouth of the Roval corridor, and nothing entered or left without their permission. 3 human colonies were behind those ships, 2 million people, and the Council kept scheduling meetings. Commander Dara Voss had stopped listening to the Council 6 months ago. She was standing in the middle of the Relentless when it dropped out of fold space at the edge of the corridor. No fanfare, no announcements. The ship simply arrived the way a stone drops into still water, quietly and with full intention. The bridge crew did not cheer. They had been training for this for 8 months. Cheering was not on the schedule. What hit Dara first was the size of the Drethkai fleet. 47 ships on the long-range display, arranged in a wall formation 3 layers deep. Each ship was roughly 4 times the mass of a standard human cruiser. Their hull design was angular and deliberate, built to intimidate as much as destroy. The Drethkai had been a Tier 1 power for 3 centuries. They had fought wars that humanity had only read about in Council archives. They had never lost a fleet engagement. They had also never fought humans before. Not really. A few border skirmishes years back, patrol ships exchanging fire before both sides pulled away. Nothing like this. Lieutenant Eric pulled up the comms panel and looked at Dara. She nodded once. The channel opened to the Drethkai fleet 2 seconds later. The voice that came through was deep and measured. Admiral Sewell. Dara had studied his file for months. 31 years of service. 18 recorded engagements. 0 losses. He was the kind of officer who believed that a battle was already won or lost before the first shot, based purely on the difference in strength between the 2 sides. He looked at 1 human ship against 47 of his own and laughed. Not a small laugh, a long one, the kind that filled a room and expected to be agreed with. "Commander," he said, "I see 1 vessel on my display. I want to confirm that is correct. 1. Dara said nothing. "You have 10 minutes to reverse your heading and return to whatever planet you came from," Sewell continued. "After that, I will assume you are unable to make that decision for yourself, and I will make it for you by removing your ship from existence. I am not issuing a warning. I am offering you a courtesy. There is a difference." Eric was watching Dara. The rest of the bridge crew was watching Dara. She had her hands behind her back, and she was reading a data screen on the far wall power distribution across the ship's secondary systems. She made a small adjustment to the aft grid and then turned around. "Tell him 7 minutes," she said. Eric blinked. 7, he said 10. "Tell him we only need 7. Eric relayed it. There was a pause on the Drethkai channel. Then Sewell's voice returned, slightly less smooth than before. 7 minutes for what exactly?" "To get into position," Dara said. Another pause. She could hear Sewell talking to someone off comms, probably his science officers, probably asking them to run another scan on the Relentless. She knew what they would find. She knew because she had spent 6 months making sure they would find exactly that. The Relentless was not a ship anyone had ever seen before. It had been built inside a hollowed-out asteroid in a system the Council's maps listed as uninhabited. 140 engineers, 80 weapons specialists, 11 years of quiet, patient, classified work. The project had no official name in any government database. The crew called it IRONVIL. It had never been photographed. It had never been logged. The Council did not know it existed. What the Drethkai's scanners were now telling Admiral Sewell was that the vessel in front of him did not match any known human ship classification. The hull signature was wrong. The energy output was wrong. The mass readings were wrong. Nothing in their database cross-referenced correctly. Sewell, to his credit, did not hesitate long. He ordered 3 cruisers to fire a warning strike, not to destroy, just to demonstrate, to remind the one human ship what 47 Drethkai vessels felt like. The 3 cruisers fired. Precision beams, high energy, each one aimed at a different section of the Relentless. All 3 shots hit the outer dispersal field and simply stopped. They spread across the hull like light across water and vanished. No flash, no damage report, no reaction from the Relentless at all. The Drethkai bridge went quiet. On the Relentless, Dara watched the energy absorption reading climb briefly and then stabilize. She turned to her weapons officer, Lieutenant Coral, and said simply, "Start the clock." Coral hit the timer on the tactical display. On the Drethkai flagship, Admiral Sewell stared at his science officer, who had no explanation ready, who was checking his instruments twice because the first reading could not possibly be right. The Relentless had not moved. It had not fired back. It had not made any threatening gesture at all. It had simply sat there, absorbed everything thrown at it, and waited. Sewell did not know it yet, but he had already lost. The next 7 minutes would prove it. The Drethkai science officer's name was Priel, and he had never been wrong in 14 years of fleet service. His instruments did not fail. His readings did not lie. When he ran a full spectrum analysis of an unknown vessel, the result was always clean, always categorized, always filed under a known classification within minutes. He ran the scan on the Relentless 4 times. Each time the result came back the same, unknown. Not unknown as in unfamiliar. Unknown as in the ship did not fit inside any box his system had been built to recognize. The hull was layered differently than anything in the human catalog. The energy signature ran at a frequency his instruments had no name for. And the mass was completely wrong. The Relentless looked from the outside like a mid-class human cruiser, but the mass reading said something closer to a dreadnought, maybe larger. Priel pulled off his headset and walked to Admiral Sewell with the data screen. Sewell looked at it once and handed it back. Equipment malfunction. Run diagnostics. Priel had already run diagnostics. He said so quietly. The instruments were fine. Sewell stared at the display at the front of the bridge where the Relentless sat unmoving in the dark. His 3 cruisers had opened fire on it less than 2 minutes ago. 3 clean hits. No damage. No response. The human ship had simply taken it. That was the part that bothered him most. Not the unknown readings, not the hull analysis failure. The fact that it had taken the shots and done nothing. It had not fired back. It had not tried to run. It had just absorbed the energy and waited. What was it waiting for? On the Relentless, the crew knew exactly what they were waiting for. 6 months earlier, Dara had stood in a briefing room inside the IRONVEIL facility and listened to the lead engineer explain what the ship could and could not do. The engineer, a quiet woman named Vel who had spent a decade on the project, had not dressed anything up. She spoke in plain terms. The ship was a weapons platform built entirely around one principle. Study your enemy until you understand them better than they understand themselves. Then build the one thing they cannot stop. The Drethkai were a known quantity. 30 years of archived Council intelligence. 11 recorded fleet engagements in galactic history. Documented weapons types, shield frequencies, tactical doctrines, preferred battle formations, standard scatter patterns on retreat. Everything public, everything available, everything that every other species had access to but had never bothered to analyze in full. The IRONVEIL team had analyzed all of it. What they found was this: the Drethkai won battles because they were strong in a straight fight. Their shields were excellent against energy weapons, their cruisers were fast, their fleet coordination was precise, but every single battle they had ever won followed the same template: heavy opening fire to establish dominance, flanking pressure on the weaker opponent's sides, controlled advance to eliminate escape routes, then close-range finishing strikes. They had never fought an opponent that came straight at them. They had never fought a ship that absorbed energy weapons. They had never encountered kinetic fold projectiles, because no species had ever developed them. They had never had their communication frequencies jammed from the moment a battle began, because no one had ever thought to do it before the first shot was fired. The Relentless had been doing that last part since it dropped out of fold space. Admiral Sewell did not know his comms to the Galactic Council had been going nowhere for the past 9 minutes. He did not know that every encoded Drethkai military frequency in the corridor was being absorbed and silently discarded by a dispersal antenna array built into the Relentless underbelly. He did not know that the human ship had spent the past several minutes cataloging the exact position and energy signature of every one of his 47 vessels, and feeding that data into a targeting system that had taken 4 years to build. What he knew was that his enemy was sitting still, and that bothered him. "All ships," Sewell said. "Full engagement. I want that hull opened." On the Relentless, Eric heard the Drethkai fleet frequency shift, the signal pattern that IRONVEIL's intelligence library had classified as a coordinated fire order. "They're committing," he said. Dara nodded. She had expected it at 8 minutes. It came at 9. Sewell was slightly more patient than his record suggested. She noted that for later. "Coral," she said, "dispersal configuration on my mark." Lieutenant Coral had her hand on the control already. She had practiced the sequence 412 times over the past 8 months. Her hand was not shaking. 47 Drethkai warships opened fire at once. The corridor lit up with more concentrated firepower than any human vessel had ever faced from a single engagement in the history of recorded space conflict. The Relentless took it all. And then Dara said mark. The ship began to change shape. Not dramatically, not like something from a cheap fiction serial. Subtly, deliberately, the outer hull sections separated into a layered dispersal configuration that IRONVEIL's engineers had spent 2 years perfecting. From the outside, it looked less like a warship now and more like something that had opened up. Something that had been waiting for exactly this moment to stop pretending it was small. Coral began to smile. "Kinetic fold systems are hot," she said. Dara looked at the display. 47 targets, all of them still firing, all of them completely confident that more firepower was the answer. "Pick the 3 closest," she said. "Let's introduce ourselves properly." The first 3 Drethkai cruisers never saw what hit them. That was the thing about kinetic fold projectiles. They did not glow. They did not leave a trail of light across the dark. They did not announce themselves the way energy weapons did. A high-energy beam was visible from 100 kilometers. You could track it, measure it, respond to it. Drethkai shield technology had been built around exactly that, reading incoming energy and dispersing it before it reached the hull. A kinetic fold round was a solid mass moving at a speed the fold space envelope made possible. It did not interact with energy-based shields. It simply went through them, the same way a stone goes through smoke. The first cruiser lost its engine block in a single hit. The second lost its weapons array and half its portside hull. The third, the one that had fired the opening warning shot at the Relentless 20 minutes earlier, came apart in the middle. Not exploded, separated. The front half drifted one direction. The rear half went the other. Both pieces went dark. The Drethkai fleet stopped firing. Not because they had been ordered to. Because every bridge crew in the corridor had just watched 3 of their own ships get destroyed by a weapon none of them could see, and none of their instruments had flagged as incoming. There was a delay that lasted several seconds where 44 warships simply did not move. The kind of pause that happens when a brain receives information it is not built to process. Admiral Sewell broke the silence himself. "Report," he said. His voice was controlled, but only barely. The answers from his fleet were useless. No energy signature detected. No projectile signature detected. No launch flash. Nothing on any spectrum. 3 ships gone and not a single sensor had caught how. The Relentless was moving now. Not to the sides, not pulling back, straight ahead, down the center of the 44 remaining ships. Sewell recognized the geometry of that approach. It was tactically insane. Going down the center meant being in range of every ship in the formation simultaneously. It was the kind of move a desperate enemy made when they had no real options left. He had seen it before, a cornered opponent charging the line because retreat was already cut off. He ordered his ships to close the formation, trap it in the middle, finish it at close range. That was the second mistake. The Relentless had predicted the close formation response. It was in the Drethkai Tactical Doctrine archive. Vell had flagged it as the most likely adaptive response on Sewell's part during the planning phase, and the IRONVEIL targeting system had already calculated optimal firing solutions for a compressed formation specifically. Grouped ships were easier to damage sequentially. One round that disabled a thruster array sent debris into the adjacent vessel. 2 ships closed together meant a single well-placed hit could affect both. Coral was working through the target list with the focused energy of someone who had rehearsed every single step of this. Her voice was calm. Target acquired, round away. Target acquired, round away. Not fast, not rushed, precise. Each shot placed with intention. An engine cluster here. A comms array there. A weapons hardpoint taken clean off the forward section of a heavy cruiser. Dara had been specific about this in the mission brief. Disable, do not destroy where possible. Killing 2 million colony civilians would not be fixed by killing Drethkai soldiers. The goal was to remove the fleet as a fighting force, not to bury a graveyard in the Roval corridor. Coral understood. Most of her shots were placed to cripple and stop, not to kill. But some of the Drethkai ships did not give her a choice. 3 separate vessels broke formation and drove straight at the Relentless at ramming speed. A last-resort tactic the archive had classified as a desperation move, used when a Drethkai commander believed all other options were gone. Dara recognized it for what it was, gave the order, and Coral put rounds through the drives of all 3 before they closed the distance. They drifted to a stop a few kilometers short, engines dead, harmless. Eric was tracking the battle timer on his panel. His hands were steady now. The first few minutes had been hard, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of knowing what was happening on the other side of each shot. He had reminded himself of the colony signal. 11 months of the same words on loop. Children dying. He had let that sit in his chest and he had done his job. 19 disabled, he said. 4 destroyed, 21 still active. Dara studied the tactical display. The Drethkai formation had broken apart. Ships were no longer moving in coordination. Some were pulling back toward the far end of the corridor. Some were holding position and continuing to fire energy weapons at the Relentless, shots that the dispersal field kept absorbing without complaint. One ship was just stopped. No movement, no firing, just sitting there in the middle of everything. That was the flagship. Sewell had gone quiet on all frequencies for the past several minutes. Dara had noticed. She had also noticed his ship had not fired a single shot since the 3rd minute of the engagement. He was watching, he was thinking, he was trying to understand. She could tell him everything. She was going to, just not yet. Keep working the active ships, she told Coral. Disable only. Give the retreating ones room, let them go. Coral nodded and turned back to her panel. The Relentless kept moving through the corridor, steady and unhurried, like something that had waited a very long time for this exact moment. Priel was no longer focused on instruments. He had given up trying to classify what was happening outside the flagship and had started doing something that felt deeply unprofessional for a science officer. He was watching through the hull camera feed with his hands folded and his mouth shut, the way a person watches something they do not yet have words for. The Relentless was moving between Drethkai warships the way a blade moves between ribs, Not aggressive, not reckless, calculated. Every turn it made brought it to the next most advantageous position. Every shot it fired took out exactly the systems needed to neutralize a threat and nothing more. It was not trying to destroy the fleet. It was disassembling it. The difference was enormous. And Priel felt that difference in his chest like a cold weight. He had studied 41 years of Dominion military records. He had read after-action reports from battles that humanity had not even existed as a spacefaring species for. He had never once, in any archive, read a description of an engagement that looked like this. This was not a battle, it was a correction. Admiral Sewell had stopped issuing orders 4 minutes ago. Not because he had given up, Priel knew Sewell too well for that, but because every order he gave was being anticipated. Twice, he had repositioned a group of ships, and the Relentless had already adjusted its heading before the repositioning was complete. Once he had tried a feint, pulled 2 cruisers wide left to draw the human ship's attention, while 3 more closed from the right. The human ship had disabled the 3 on the right before they were within firing range, and then calmly returned to disabling everything else. It was not reacting to the Drethkai fleet, it was reading it. There was a difference between those two things, and sitting in the middle of a battle that was dissolving around him, Sewell finally understood it. He turned to Priel. "Pull up our tactical doctrine archive," he said. "Our standard fleet scatter protocol. Show me what the response pattern looks like on a display." Priel pulled it up. The scatter pattern was a standard formation, designed over decades, tested in real engagements, built to maximize distance between retreating ships to make pursuit inefficient. Sewell stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked at the battle display, at the positions of the Drethkai ships that had already been disabled, at the headings they had been on when they were hit. Every single disabled ship had been moving on a vector that matched the scatter protocol. They had not been caught in random positions. They had been caught in predicted positions. The Relentless had known where they were going to be before they got there, not because it was reading their movements in real time, because someone had studied the doctrine and pre-calculated the vectors. They knew, Sewell said quietly, not to Priel, not to anyone in particular, just knew. He tried to open a channel to the Galactic Council. He needed to get a message out. He needed someone to know what was happening in this corridor. The Council had resources. Other Tier 1 species had fleets. If humanity had built something like this, if they had something that could do this to a Dominion blockade fleet, the Council needed to know immediately. The channel produced nothing, no carrier signal, no acknowledgement, just silence. He tried his military command frequency. Silent. Emergency broadcast. Silent. Even the basic long-range comms, the kind that had been in service for 80 years without interruption, returned nothing. Priel ran a check. The results came back quickly. Every outgoing signal from every Drethkai ship in the corridor was being absorbed. Not blocked. Absorbed. Something on the human vessel was pulling the signals out of space and eliminating them before they could propagate. They had been in a communications blackout since the moment the Relentless arrived. The entire battle had taken place in silence, as far as the rest of the galaxy was concerned. Sewell sat down. He had not sat down on a command bridge during an engagement in 31 years. Outside the flagship, the Relentless had reduced the active Drethkai fleet to 6 ships. Most of the others were drifting with disabled engines or weapon systems. Their crews were alive. Their ships were intact. They simply could not fight anymore. On the Relentless, Eric watched the last retreating ships disappear toward the far end of the corridor. 6 left, and the flagship. 39 down, he said. 17 minutes total. He thought about what that number meant. 47 ships, 17 minutes. He had known intellectually during the training months what the mission was designed to accomplish. Knowing it and watching it happen were completely different things. He felt something that was not quite pride and not quite sorrow, a complicated feeling he did not have a word for yet. Dara was looking at the flagship on the display. It had not moved. It had not fired. It was sitting in the middle of the corridor exactly where it had been when the battle began, surrounded now by the drifting wreckage and disabled hulls of the fleet it had commanded. "Arak," she said, "open a channel to the flagship." He did. The channel sat open for 3 seconds before Sewell answered. His voice had changed. It was still controlled, but the certainty that had been in it at the start, the deep, absolute certainty of a man who had never lost, was gone. "Commander," he said. "Admiral," Dara said, "you have 6 active ships left. I would like to talk before that changes." A pause, then talk. Dara did not make Admiral Sewell wait. She had seen people use silence as a power tool in negotiations, stretch the quiet until the other side grew uncomfortable and started making concessions just to fill the air. She did not do that. She had nothing to prove. The corridor full of disabled Drethkai warships had already proven everything that needed proving. She spoke plainly. "The blockade ends today," she said. "Every Drethkai vessel in this corridor withdraws. The supply lines to Colony Varen, Colony Drast, and Colony Pell reopen within 24 hours. Your government submits a formal statement to the Galactic Council acknowledging the blockade as an act of unprovoked aggression. Those are the terms." A long pause from Sewell's end. "And if I refuse," he said, not aggressively. He said it the way a man asks a question he already knows the answer to but needs to hear out loud anyway. "Then I disable your remaining 6 ships the same way I disabled the other 39, Dara said. "And you submit the statement from a vessel with no engines and no weapons, which is a less dignified position. But the statement still gets submitted." Another pause, shorter this time. "Commander," Sewell said, "I need to understand something. Before I agree to anything, I need to understand. How long have you been planning this?" Dara thought about the honest answer. She thought about the asteroid facility and the 11 years of quiet work and the 140 engineers who had gone home to their families every night without being able to tell anyone what they were building. She thought about the colony signal playing on loop for 11 months while the council scheduled meetings. She thought about the children. "Long enough," she said. "That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters. You spent 3 centuries believing humanity was not capable of something like this. That belief was the plan. You maintained it for us." Silence on the Drethkai channel. She could hear Sewell breathing. She let that go on for a few seconds. She was not trying to humiliate him. She was not trying to make him feel small. She was just telling the truth, and the truth had weight. "Your weapons," Sewell said. "The kinetic fold system. Nothing in our archive, nothing in any species archive documents that technology. Where did it come from?" "We developed it." "When?" 11 years ago." A much longer pause. Priel's voice drifted in faintly from the background of the Drethkai channel, speaking to Sewell in their own language. Dara caught fragments but did not speak Drethkai well enough to follow it. She waited. Sewell returned, the communications blackout since the beginning. "Yes. No one knows this happened." "Not yet," Dara said. "That changes when you make the statement." Another long silence. On the relentless bridge, Arak was very still. Coral had her hand resting on the panel but was not touching any controls. The 6 remaining Drethkai ships had not moved in several minutes. They were just sitting there, waiting for whatever their admiral decided. Sewell asked one more question. It came out differently from the others, slower, with something underneath it that was not quite fear and not quite respect, but some combination of both. "The relentless," he said, "is it the only one?" Dara looked at Arak. He looked back. Neither of them said anything. "Admiral," Dara said finally, "that is not information I am going to give you." The silence after that lasted almost 20 seconds. Then Sewell spoke to his remaining ships in Drethkai. Dara did not need a translator for what happened next. The 6 active ships powered down their weapons arrays one by one. Drive signatures shifted from combat to withdrawal. They began to move. Sewell came back on the channel. "The terms are accepted," he said. "I will transmit withdrawal coordinates to my fleet. The statement to the Council will follow within 6 hours." "Within 2, Dara said. A pause. "Within 2, he agreed. The channel closed. On the bridge of the Relentless, no one cheered. Eric let out a long breath and leaned back in his seat. Coral brought the weapons systems down to standby. 2 crew members near the back of the bridge shook hands quietly. Dara watched the Drethkai ships on the display, the active ones retreating, the disabled ones drifting, and she thought about Vel in the asteroid facility, who had spent 11 years building something she hoped would never have to fly but knew probably would. She thought about the Council that had spent 11 months watching 2 million people run out of food and calling it diplomacy. She thought about whether any of this had been necessary. Not the battle had been necessary, but everything that had led to a situation where one ship had to come alone into a corridor to do what 40 governments had refused to do together. Eric broke the quiet. "Commander," he said, "Colony Varen is on long range. They're asking what happened. The blockade comms just went dark from their end and they don't know why." Dara turned to face him. "Tell them the corridor is open," she said. "Tell them to get their supply ships moving." Eric nodded and turned to his panel. His voice when he opened the channel was steady, but only just. "Colony Varen," he said, "this is the Relentless. The Roval corridor is open. You are clear." The response from the colony took 4 seconds to arrive. It was not words. It was sound. Voices, many of them, overlapping from a room or a hall or a street where people had been waiting for 11 months with no reason left to believe the answer was coming. No one on the Relentless Bridge said anything for a while after that. Admiral Sewell's statement reached the Galactic Council chambers 4 hours and 51 minutes after the battle ended. The Council was in the middle of its 4th scheduled session on the Roval corridor situation. Representatives from 22 species were present. A Drethkai liaison was seated at the table, preparing to deliver another argument about the Dominion's right to regulate corridor access for security purposes. The statement came through on the official military transmission line. It was read aloud by the Chamber's automated translation system in all 22 languages simultaneously. The room went very quiet. The Drethkai liaison stood up, received a private message on his personal channel, and sat back down. He did not speak again for the rest of the session. The Council did not resume debate on the corridor situation. There was no debate to have. The blockade was already over. The supply lines were already moving. Colony Varen's first resupply freighter had docked 11 hours after the Relentless transmitted the all-clear. Colony Drast and Colony Pell followed within the day. What the Council spent the next 6 hours discussing in closed session, with the chamber sealed and the translation feeds cut, was something else entirely. The statement from Admiral Sewell described a human warship that had taken direct fire from 47 vessels and sustained 0 damage. A ship that used weapons no species in the known galaxy had documented. A ship that had jammed all Drethkai communications for the duration of the engagement without detection. A ship that had engaged a full Dominion fleet and disabled or destroyed 43 vessels in under 20 minutes before accepting a surrender. One ship, a representative from the Vaughny Collective, was the first to ask what everyone was thinking. She asked whether humanity had more of them. Nobody in the room knew the answer. The Council sent a formal inquiry to Earth's government. Earth's government responded with a brief, polite statement thanking the Council for its concern, and nodding that matters of human military capability were an internal matter not subject to Council review. That answer, more than any number of disabled warships, was what made certain species understand that something had changed. A motion was introduced to formally reclassify humanity's status in the galactic ranking system. The argument against reclassification, that one engagement, however remarkable, was insufficient to change an assessment, did not survive the session. Nobody in that room wanted to be seen arguing that a species that had just dismantled a Tier 1 fleet with a single prototype vessel was still Tier 3. The classification was changed, not to Tier 1. The Council created a new tier designation for the first time in its 800-year history. The paperwork called it Tier Provisional Alpha, which was the Council's careful way of saying, "We do not yet know what category fits, and we are not in a hurry to guess wrong." In the Roval corridor, the Relentless was doing nothing dramatic. It was holding position near the corridor entrance, while the last of the disabled Drethkai ships were towed out by Dominion recovery vessels. The terms of the surrender included a provision that Dara had insisted on personally. Drethkai engineering teams could board and assess their own disabled vessels, and no crew members of disabled ships would be taken as prisoners. She had not been interested in captives. She had been interested in a corridor. Eric spent most of that waiting period answering messages from Earth. His family had seen the news. Most of the crew's families had. The story had spread faster than the Council's closed session could contain it. Someone on Colony Varen had recorded the docking of the first supply freighter, and the sound that came from the crowd on the landing platform, that sound, and it was playing on every news channel that had a frequency. Dara spent those hours writing a report, not for the Council, not for the government, for Vel and the IRONVEIL team, because they deserved to know how it went from the person who had taken their work into the field. She wrote it in plain language. She described what the weapons had done, how the dispersal field had held, what had worked exactly as designed, and what had needed small adjustments. She wrote about the moment Sewell had gone silent on his bridge and sat down. She wrote about the colony signal from Varen. On Colony Varen itself, in a settlement called Hara near the northern edge of the main continent, a girl named Bessa, who was 9 years old, and had spent the last 8 months eating half portions of preserved grain, was standing outside her home watching the sky. She was not watching for anything specific. She did not know what had happened in the corridor. Her parents had told her the food was coming but had not explained why, because they did not fully understand it themselves yet. She just knew that the sky was different today, that something in the way adults were standing and talking and sometimes stopping to wipe their eyes suggested the long, heavy thing that had been sitting on all of them was gone. A freighter passed overhead on its approach to the landing zone, big and slow and full. Bessa watched it until it was gone below the horizon. She did not know the name of the ship in the corridor. She did not know the name of the commander. She did not know anything about kinetic fold weapons or IRONVEIL or the Galactic Council session or the new tier designation. She just knew the freighter had come. In a lot of ways, that was the whole point. Far away in the corridor, the Relentless finished its holding pattern, received clearance from Dara, and turned its heading toward home. It moved without fanfare through the dark, a ship that very few people had known existed this morning, and that the entire galaxy was quietly rethinking tonight. It did not hurry. It had done what it came to do.